Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Duncan. How are you?
Hello, Lorraine. I'm very well, thank you. And you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So we're really excited that you're here and our first guest, actually, Duncan. So thanks ever so much for joining us on Conveyancing Matters. For those who don't know who Duncan is, he's the fantastic CEO of Gazeal, and Duncan will tell us a little bit about Gazeal. And I work with Gazeal on a consultancy basis. And Stu, your firm does some work with Gazeal as well. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've worked with Gazeal for a few years now, and we've been mightily impressed right from the start. Not just with Duncan and the team, but it's the product itself, and it enables us to give our clients certainty, which we can't do under the normal sort of conveyancing process. So this podcast and this video is going to go out to lots of lawyers out there, and I strongly recommend them to drop Duncan a line and investigate the Gazeal products. It's certainly something else we can offer our clients.
Yeah, so Duncan, let's start at the beginning, as they say. We haven't got all day, but tell for those that don't know, and most will, of course, just tell us, briefly what is a reservation agreement? Because Gazeal is all about reservation agreements, and I really think the product you've got now is great. So tell us just in basic terms first, what the hell is a reservation agreement, and why would a seller and a buyer want one?
Well, people need really have to have a reservation agreement just because of the certainty that's involved. As we all know, there's an offer to buy a property is not binding until exchange of contracts, and as we all know, that could be any time from a couple of weeks to several months later, depending upon how complex the title is and how many inquiries need to be raised, how many issues need to be dealt with. And at any time during that period, either party can walk away. And as a result of that, as we all know, the standard metric in the estate agency profession is that about a third of all transactions that are agreed fail to get through to exchange of contracts. Well, that involves huge amounts of stress, anxiety, and wasted costs. And what we're aiming to do is to reduce that stress and anxiety and reduce the wasted costs. The reservation agreement, essentially, reservation agreements, as we all know, have been around for a very long time. It's just that usually they're lengthy and complicated to negotiate. It's difficult to know who holds the reservation deposit or how much it's going to be, and also people are unlikely to enter into them without having had a lot of information up front, so they've got a better idea of what it is that they're buying. So what we do is make sure that the seller completes all of the protocol forms at the point at which they list the property for sale, that the buyer has access to all of those protocol forms before they make their offer, so their offer is fully informed. And what we find is that if we've got an informed buyer, and an informed buyer is more committed, and the informed buyer is happy, and the seller is obviously wants to enter into a reservation agreement. The reservation agreement is very simple, it's very quick, it's standard. It's only one page long. It's written in clear and simple English, and it just allows the parties to make a mutual financial commitment to each other. So if either party withdraws unreasonably, then they commit to pay the other party that mutual financial commitment.
So let's unpick that a bit, Duncan. Well, we could stop there, couldn't we? Say, well, that's it. Thank you for joining Conveyancing Matters. So that's and the thing is, as Stu and I see sort of time and time again, as you say, it's that attrition rate, isn't it? It's that fallout rate. That 1/3. Let's just stop 1/3 of transactions.
Yes, 1/3 of all transactions.
It's absolutely huge.
It's huge.
So, Stu, how? Because it's fair to say, and I've worked with Gazeal for quite a while now, and it's fair to say that conveyancers don't like change. And of course, the issue of reservation agreements, was certainly on the government's agenda, very high on the agenda this time last year. But of course, everything has changed since then to some degree. But as I say, it's certainly my impression that conveyancing lawyers don't like change. They don't like to hear about anything new. So, why for you and your team, you've got a big team of people who probably don't want to think about anything new. So why for you does the Gazeal reservation agreement kind of tick the boxes? Why can you embrace it
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was first approached or first approached to look into the Gazeal products, yeah, there's obviously some concern that, you know, we have to change, you know, the way we work. Are people going to be skeptical? And most importantly, you know, is it going to cost us loads of money? These are the things that I worry about or would worry about when looking at any new product. But for me, the proposition and the beauty of it is it's simple. You know, it's not sort of involving going through pages and pages of contractual obligations and so on and so forth. And I think that's really, you know, what we as lawyers think. You know, all of a sudden we're going to be looking at contractual agreements that are outside of the standard conditions of sale and outside of the sort of, you know, pre-drafted format. And therefore, is it going to be more complex? Is it going to be more long-winded? And this is why I urge everybody to look at, you know, the proposition, because it's not, you know, it's very, very, very simple, and it does what it says on the tin. You know, it protects both parties. As Duncan said, it's not a document with countless points that we've got to go through and countless points that we're sort of then thinking how we're going to advise our clients on. You know, it does what it says on the tin. It gives both clients, whether it be buyer or seller, that certainty and access to more information upfront at an earlier stage.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found interesting and different about it is certainly, you know, when in the past I've been involved with sort of dealing with clients who've had a lockout agreement, you know, you find that quite a lot of sort of anxiety between the seller and buyer gets sort of entrenched before you've even sort of got into the conveyancing process. And Duncan, one of the things I really, really like about the Gazeal reservation agreement, which, as we know, but for the benefit of those who don't, is simply, you know, essentially entered into between the seller and the buyer, and in your case, Gazeal as well, you know, at the time the sale is agreed, so all the parties know property price, time frame, they negotiate the time that they're prepared to be tied into it, essentially. But Duncan, what really commends it to me is that simplicity. So, kind of, you know, in words of one syllable, so the likes of me can understand it. Can you just briefly explain to us, you know, what under the Gazeal reservation agreement, what are the circumstances in which a buyer can walk away without penalty?
Yeah, well, the obviously it's not intending to bind the parties in completely. The buyer is obviously able to walk away if the title is no good, if the lender refuses a mortgage or other sort of forms of third-party finance doesn't actually come through. If a surveyor is prepared to state that there are urgent repairs that need to be done to the property that equates to more than 1% of the value of the property, and if it's in a chain, if the chain collapses. So it provides
really nice, straightforward, simple, identifiable stuff for the lawyers, stuff that we would all recognise. They're the specified circumstances under which a buyer can walk away from this agreement without penalty. So, Duncan, the clarity is one of the things I really liked about it, and the certainty. And the other agreements I've seen are very woolly around the edges. So what happens, for example, if, unfortunate though it may be, you know, a party has, particularly of course likely to be the buyer, but, you know, an unfortunate family event, a crisis, you know, loses their job, what's the score then?
Well, obviously the certainty runs both ways. You have to, you know, if you want to have certainty from the seller is making a commitment by withdrawing the property from the market, which means it would probably take them, you know, a good 6 months or so in order to agree another deal. And the buyer is so if the buyer is looking to withdraw and walk away for reasons that are not anything to do with the transaction, then they would forfeit the amount of the mutual financial commitment. So that's why we allow the parties to choose between them, to negotiate between them what a mutual financial commitment that they feel suits their own needs, is suitable to the value of the property, and it's something that is that they're prepared to forfeit if something disastrous like that were to happen.
So from our nice sort of clean, tidy the lawyer point of view, from Stu and mine's point of view, then whilst it would be hugely unfortunate if a buyer had some catastrophic event, that there aren't those grey areas. Of course, if the seller wants to continue the agreement and be kind and lovely about it, they're of course perfectly entitled to do that. But we do have that nice sort of point of clarity. And
Yes.
one of the things, Stu, that I wanted to ask you about is this old vexed issue of the reservation deposit, because what I think other reservation agreement providers haven't got the head round, and certainly the SRA and the CLC took a different view here, the idea that the buyer puts down typically 1% of the purchase price to reserve that property. They've got to stump up 1% of the purchase price due under ordinary agreements, not the Gazeal agreement. And of course, from your perspective, that causes an issue in terms of money, because it's something that's outside, that's been paid before you get involved.
Yeah, I think for me, the beauty of the reservation agreement, it just stops people changing their mind. It's this certainty, isn't it? So it stops people changing their mind and pulling out for reasons that are not right. If a buyer was to pull out, the reasons are substantial reasons. That's the key point. Now, they're real reasons. They physically can't go ahead because they can't get a mortgage, or there's a massive problem with the title. Okay, it means they can't register it in their name. These are big, valid reasons why the clients can't pull out. Not merely they've changed their mind.
Yeah.
Or,
don't know.
Or not.
Sure.
There's not the process of maybe trying to look at running two transactions, two properties along at the same time. That kind of thing. So that's for me the beauty. There is the flexibility for somebody to pull out, but only in circumstances that are serious and legit. So I think it's one of those where it's got the binding element and the certainty, but equally it's got the flexibility if there's a serious issue.
Yeah,
that's the beauty of it, in my opinion.
So Duncan, one of the things that I always rabbit on about, I say from the lawyer's perspective, is the old source of funds thing. And under certainly the government sort of proposed draft reservation agreement, a buyer would come along, I don't know, £300,000 property, they'd probably pay over, the idea is that they stump up £3,000 of their hard-earned cash, big question mark, to reserve the property under an ordinary reservation agreement. There's a big question mark about whether buyers can actually produce that money in the first place at that point. And from Stu and mine's point of view, who would hold that money, and source of funds and source of wealth. So if the buyer is stumping up £3,000 and giving it to an estate agent or whoever before we as the conveyancers are involved, well, that's a big chunk of money that's suddenly we've not had any control over, that's happened before us. And so the big thing for me, before I do want to take some time to talk about your lovely self as well, Duncan, so perhaps we'll make this the last point on the agreement, but can you just explain it briefly, what you've done? And this to me, and I hate to use the word game changer, but I really think this is the big thing for me, the clarity and simplicity for Stu, but the money thing for me. So under the Gazeal reservation agreement, the buyer does not have to stump up that 1% of the purchase price. And of course, the seller gets tied in under your agreement as well. So in a nutshell, how does that happen under your agreement, under your arrangement?
Well, the big thing is that neither party actually has to put any cash down at all. The reason why Gazeal is a party to the agreement is because Gazeal is acting as guarantor. So the problem that obviously the buyer has, if they have to put down coming back to what you're saying about the version of the agreement that the government's looking at the moment, one of the big things about it is because they're trying to make it completely mutual, so they're expecting the seller to put money down as well.
It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Frankly, is not going to happen. If you imagine an estate agent going in to do a valuation, and he says, "Oh yes, we work with this government-backed reservation agreement. That means that when we find you an offer, then you're going to have to put money down to secure it." Well, he's never going to say that, because he knows that the next agent coming in to do the valuation is not going to be asking any money from the seller. But agents do not like asking money from sellers for very good reasons.
Well, most of the sellers aren't going to have the money. I mean, Stu, just to detour slightly, but most people are, the way that most buyers generate additional money is probably buying more, borrowing more off their existing mortgage.
Yeah,
Most people don't have a chunk of money
exactly,
sitting in their bank account.
Most transactions, where clients are buying onwards or selling, there's reasons why, and lots of capital is equally tied up and the property's being sold. Sellers, I think Duncan's hit the nail on the head. Nobody's going to voluntarily put money in. If it's not mandatory that you have to put it in, why would you voluntarily pay any money? So I don't think you need to say any more than that. It's just never going to happen.
So Duncan, so just briefly explain the guarantor point. How does that work then? How does it work under the Gazeal arrangement?
Well, under the contract, both parties enter into, they give each other a mutual financial commitment. So they're saying, if I withdraw unreasonably as defined within the contract, then I will pay you however much. Starts at £2,000 and they can go up from there. We have one on the market at the moment where the seller is insisting upon their £100,000. But it
What's
can
he selling? Buckingham Palace?
It's a pretty big place. Yeah, exactly. it's a pretty big place. It's basically they're saying, if I withdraw unreasonably, I will pay you £2,000. But the big game changer, as you say, is no one actually has to put that cash down. If that person withdraws unreasonably, then they owe that money. If they don't pay it, then Gazeal will pay it. So the parties can enter into the agreement in the knowledge that if the other party does withdraw, if the other party has made a commitment that has got real force behind it, and that they will receive that money, but the solicitor doesn't have to worry about that money actually having to be paid over. You don't have to worry about whose client account it's going to go on, because of course the SRA does not allow any, or the CLC, I believe, does not allow any a solicitor or conveyancer to be holding monies for anyone who's not their client. So a seller obviously can't hold money for the buyer. The agent is not able to hold a deposit for very good reasons. So who's actually going to be holding that money? And then assuming that it was held in some third party escrow account, if one were able to set that up, then of course that money would then have to be transferred across to the buyer's conveyancer for them to be able to either exchange or complete as appropriate. But then who's going to have done the AML on that money?
So
who's going to have done the funds?
So, sorry, Duncan, how does that work from Gazeal's point of view then? So the buyer and the seller don't put any money up. Gazeal act up front. Gazeal acts as guarantor. Well, what's going to happen if the buyer does default? They're just going to think, well, hooray, Gazeal's going to pay it then. So how does that work?
Well, if the buyer has got a contractual obligation to pay that money. If they don't pay it, then Gazeal will pay it to the seller, so the seller doesn't need to worry about that, and Gazeal will simply pursue the buyer to be reimbursed for that money. So
it's not a get out of jail free card in the sense that the buyer will be pursued if he or she or they default, but they'll be pursued by Gazeal. But crucially, from the buyer's perspective, the seller is also tied in as well. That's exactly. I think the big thing.
Exactly.
Well, as I say, I do think that makes a big difference. But Duncan, tell us a little bit then. So you're a litigation lawyer. So tell us a little bit about how you came from litigating in Cambridge to setting up and running Gazeal. How did that happen?
I became a managing partner of a firm in Cambridge, so my responsibilities had to go beyond litigation, and so I ended up managing a practice that had a large element of conveyancing to it, and frankly, I thought that with all of the paper forms floating around, that there must be a better way of doing it, and it became something of an obsession.
Okay, so, and as you said, and I think something that's often forgotten, and I think, Stu, this is, one of the things we have mentioned before, everybody's got this big thing about, the upfront pack, haven't they? I.e., the title, copy of the title and the property information form, fittings and contents form, etc. up front. And you mentioned that really quickly in passing, Duncan, but, I think even Stu, without the Gazeal reservation agreement, even the buyer having the opportunity to look at those documents at the outset is important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm massively of the opinion that the actual sort of time frame that people look at when it comes to the conveyancing process is slightly diluted. I think people are getting confused that there's a time from when lawyers are instructed start to finish, but there's also the buying and the selling process, which obviously starts way before. So it just seems inconceivable that when a client's putting the property on the market, they can't be sort of completing forms and due diligence at that stage. I'm a massive sort of advocate of buyers doing the same kind of thing with their source of funds and ID at the earliest stage as well.
Yeah.
It's crazy how we seem to wait to the last minute, wait till we're sort of, things are really urgent to then start doing all this kind of thing. And
But agents don't like asking clients to do anything, for very good reasons. Why if you're selling a property for them, they regard their job as being to sell the property. Why throw all what the agent and the seller are going to see as barriers in the way with additional paperwork and everything. Leave it to the lawyers afterwards. But it doesn't really work in the seller's interest, because then you start doing all of the hard work actually after the property's been sold, or an offer's been accepted.
Yeah.
But the great thing about this is that it incentivizes the agent, because of course it incentivizes the agent to make sure that what we call the buyer's information pack is completed up front, so they get a committed buyer, but that committed buyer is able to enter into a reservation agreement. So the estate agent, who at the moment is seeing 1/3 of all of in order to sell two properties, he's got to get offers on 3. Well, why not just sell 2 and actually get paid on 2? So it improves their bottom line hugely. So agents, it incentivizes them. That way, it works better for the buyer, who's able to actually see everything up front, and he knows exactly what he's buying. And also works better for the conveyancer, because they're getting, what's the conveyancer getting? They're getting a shorter transaction, less work. And also, crucially, and I know from my experience of running a conveyancing practice, you're getting less stressed clients, because the clients
I also think
tied in.
I think a big deal there, Duncan, which, and we've got lots of lovely agency friends, and most of the people we all work with are good and do their jobs well. But we know there's plenty out there that perhaps could do with a bit more training, shall I say. And of course, one of the big things for us as conveyancers is the amount of time we spend on the phone chasing calls from agents. So of course, if you've got a seller and a buyer in a transaction that's tied in with, the Gazeal reservation agreement, the agent can broadly leave us alone to get on with it, because they've got the tied in seller and buyer, and can get off the phone and give us the chance to actually have the time to do our job. So Stu, have you got anything you want you've wanted to know about Duncan? Any question you've got that you want to put to Duncan?
I'll tell you what I have got. I've got some questions that I think other lawyers might be sitting there, wondering, and that is, if we as lawyers want to roll out the Gazeal process, I think the first thing a client might ask, and the first thing a lawyer might ask is, well, okay, we've got the money that's going to be potentially paid not under the reservation agreement, but what are the other costs involved? Is there going to be additional extra expenses that are going to make it problematic for us to move forward in it? So Duncan, maybe you could explain how it works from a lawyer's point of view using the product, and what it costs the client in additional monies.
It doesn't cost the lawyer anything, and it doesn't involve any IT integration or anything like that. I mean, essentially, Gazeal is involved at the point of putting the pack together and entering to the reservation agreement. The reservation agreement is very simple. Clients generally are quite happy to sign it without legal advice, because it's for all that they have to agree is the term that the agreement is going to apply for and the amount of the mutual financial commitment. It doesn't really require any legal advice. It's really quite simple. So generally, it shouldn't actually involve anything from the conveyancer's part. It doesn't cost them anything. It involves no IT integration. So it's very, very simple to do. Essentially, what they'll be receiving from the agent is the memorandum of sale and the Gazeal agreement, and they'll be receiving that from their client as well, which is simply, well, all they have to do is note the term that it's been agreed for, so that they know if they get to the end of that, towards the end of that term, then it's and they want to extend it, they need to just agree an extension very simply with the other side, and then let us know what they've agreed. We will then amend our system so that we note the new expiry date, and that the guarantee will continue to run until that date. So that's all really that the conveyancers need to do. Doesn't involve any costs, any integration there. Otherwise, they work exactly as they are now.
I think that's an interesting point, Duncan, actually, because, for a lot of people, and actually Stu and I are going to be putting out a Conveyancing Matters chat on prop tech, property, the combination by organisations of property and technology. And we certainly concluded, I think, that lots of organisations come up with so-called prop tech solutions for problems we don't think we've got. And I think that's a really important point to get over as far as Gazeal is concerned, because in the property space, as they say, you're known as a prop tech company because you've used the technology to get you to where you are, to produce the upfront pack. But I think the key phrase you just used there is, this requires no integration with the conveyancer system, kind of nothing really. And I do think that's quite an important point. So Stu, what else do you think property lawyers might want to know, or their clients?
I think from my point of view, there's a kind of analogy that I'd like to make, and it's, it's not costing the lawyers any monies to adopt this process. We're going to be binding our clients to a contractual agreement whereby there's less chance of them pulling out, so we've got much more certainty. And are we not getting back to what we should really be doing in the first place, which is actually conveyancing, which is looking at core key subjects relating to this transaction, such as the title? Do we as lawyers really, and should we, be talking to clients about what might be left at the property, and should that really be a reason for somebody withdrawing? They're spending substantial amounts of money, and then we're going to have an argument over the sofa being left and things like that. Should really that be part of our job? I think it's a bit of a throwback in that it's really concentrating what we do on the actual core conveyancing. That's the point I think I'd like to get across to other people that might be watching and listening to that piece. There are so many good USPs for using the platform. It's not costing anybody anything. There's flexibility within the product, yet it gives the certainty that a buyer and the seller should want if they're serious about following through with this transaction. And then from a lawyer's point of view, you're not getting tied up in all the admin and the tit for tat side of it. It's all the serious stuff.
So Duncan, more broadly, how are you finding the market right now? You come at it sort of more from the agent's end in a way, because you need to get into the agents sort of first, really. So give us some of your kind of views on the post-lockdown conveyancing market. Where are we? What are your predictions? How are we doing?
Well, I think we've seen quite an explosion in transactions since lockdown really started to end. I think there's been a lot of pent up demand because of Brexit and then because of COVID and everything. And people don't move for pleasure. People move because they need to. And we know historically that there's a run rate of about a million residential transactions that happen in the country every year. And people, so if transaction levels are down, it's because they're forced to down rather than actually because there's a lower demand for it. And as we've come out of, people have put off decisions because of Brexit, and then they've been locked down because of COVID. We saw quite a spike in transactions. It's been helped by the stamp duty holiday. I think that will carry on for a bit, and I think we'll see. But it could well be that there'll be a little bit of a hangover when the stamp duty holiday ends. But we'll see. We'll see about that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And Stu, how are you finding things? I think you don't know what day of the week it is at the moment, do you? No,
it's incredible. The demand really has shot through the roof. I think there are so many reasons at the moment why people want to conclude the sort of moving or refinance process. Like Duncan says, I can't see there being any dip really for the next sort of 6 months. We've got the end of the furlough scheme to contend with, and possible rise in unemployment at that point. That may have a slight effect, but I really do think this is going to see us through now to the end of March. And exactly as Duncan alluded to, it's what really happens after that. There will naturally be a dip, probably for April, May, June, and it's just really after that how quick things pick up. But I think in terms of analysis, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because this time last year we never would have dreamt we're having this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
So
exactly. I mean, I think it's quite hard to, as you say, analysis. People sort of spew it out all day and every day. I'm on Twitter now. I do Twitter, everyone. And actually, the headlines in the newspapers I just generally find are a load of old cobblers, and they make me very irritated, because they either, the whole of the conveyancing market was said to have closed during lockdown. Well, it didn't technically close. Now, of course, there were millions fewer, hundreds of thousands of fewer transactions, but actually it didn't close technically. I don't mind if people say stuff, providing it's technically correct. I think that gets on my nerves a bit. I suspect I, as a local, will probably be quite busy next April, because I reckon everyone's going to book their holidays when their stamp duty holiday ends. But of course, Duncan, perhaps to bring this Conveyancing Matters to a close, because it's just been really, really great to have you on, and and Stu and I would like to sort of thank you for taking the time out to come. But of course, I think one of the interesting things, and perhaps we'll leave the last word with your lovely self, is people might actually think, well, in a booming market, even if we're in a sort of mini boom between now and next March 2021, well, do we really need a reservation agreement? But I would have thought, buyers will probably be driving the demand, because they don't want the seller to toddle off elsewhere and sell to somebody else. What's your view?
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. In a rising market, it's buyers obviously are driving it. In a falling market, it's sellers who drive it. Luckily for us, whichever market you're in, then there's still a demand for it.
Win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Win-win. It's I think at the moment, yes, it's going to be buyers. If they're given the option to be able to lock in a deal, if someone sees a good deal, you want to tie it in there and then, because who knows what's going to have happened in the course of the next few months. There'll be an estate agent. Most buyers forget that an estate agent is legally obliged to pass on any offers that he receives right up until the point of exchange. He doesn't have any choice about it. People blame estate agents for it, but they're under a legal obligation to pass any offer on, and it's up to the seller as to whether or not they accept it. So if you don't tie that offer in to put the seller under a legal obligation with some sort of penalty if they accept that other offer, then you're likely to lose out. And that's we quoted that figure before, that 33% of all transactions fail to get through to exchange. That's one of the reasons why.
Well, I think that's probably, with that figure ringing in people's ears, Duncan, we'll bring this Conveyancing Matters to a close. So I'll just leave you and Stu to say a tender goodbye.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an honour and a pleasure. So thank you very much for your time.
Not at all.
Yeah. That's it. Thanks, Duncan, for being our first ever guest on Conveyancing Matters.
It's a historic moment. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.